Kind of a king. Hey, catch this rhythm. You feel that? That's called playerism. I'm on the scene, a player clean, poker face, 4 queens. I got 4 of a kind on everything. Dig this, living elite. I don't feel complete without kicking at my feet in a Rolls Royce every week. Maybe this is deep. Listen close when I speak. I need to at least, cause I'm too much. Got 2 nuts and give 0 fucks. I've been player too long for you to tell me having 2 women is too wrong. The way I get my groove on. If I can't have 2, then I gotta move on. Even my car is 2-tone. So when I roam, I gotta bring 2 home. Quit banging my line, ho. Quit banging my line, ho. When you see me act like you don't even know me, ho. When you see me act like you don't even know me, ho.
Understand what we're doing here. Like William, for example, was at the last conference. Brandon,
come on, baby, get a clue. How you do what you do? How do you fall in love with me, but I'm not in love with you? Quit banging my... Peace to the saints! Peace to the saints!
Peace to the saints. Today we're talking about an absolutely critical topic that strangely doesn't get much press, and it could be critical to your life and survival, literally and also financially. Turns out that the happenings going on around the world, which have been stoked by the United States' involvement, are going to cause much more death and much more financial woe. It's quite a pity. I am going to elucidate some of these matters for you, as it is quite complex and there is a lot of information missing. I was looking at an article recently, which I was really impressed that it was even written. And I'm going to go through a couple pieces for you. Number one, I'm going to talk about how the Ukraine one should have already been checkmated. The only reason the Ukraine still stands today is for the interventions of the United States and the European Union. They've basically prolonged a war in which one of the combatants had no chance, namely Ukraine. So in prolonging that war, what they do is cause the United States to bankrupt itself, the European Union to be not only risking itself financially, but also this winter's coming up and Russian gas supplies the energy needed to heat the homes of Europe. And I wouldn't be surprised if Putin gets even more ruthless. I'm very curious to see what happens. A lot of those states are not energy self-sufficient. They are importing this most critical resource. So we're going to talk about Ukraine's request from the United States, the bank of all places who need something for free. They're requesting long-range missiles. And long-range missiles would be great for a state like Ukraine because it would allow them to strike at Russia within Russian borders. And that essentially could take Russia from an aggressive offensive posture into a defensive mode. And as the master Sun Tzu states, that defense implies lack, offense applies abundance, which is quite true. You always want to be on the attack. You want to be on the offensive rather than just trying to defend your own territory. Ukraine would be very impressive if they could attack Russia. That probably won't be happening unless Zalenskyy is a clever devil. And I'll give you an example of what I would do if I were Zalenskyy. So we're going to talk about how Ukraine has requested those long-range weapons. We're going to discuss what Joe Biden decided to do in terms of providing weaponry to Ukraine. And mind you, a tremendous amount of taxpayer money has been allocated to support the likes of Ukraine. You as an American citizen might be asking yourself, well, what did Ukraine ever do for me? Not a damn thing. What will they ever do for you in the future? Not a damn thing. It just is what it is. As long as you have this corrupt, power-hungry government of globalists, hey, who knows what's really going on? We'll also answer one of those questions that seems to never get asked, which is the whole world against Russia, or does Russia actually have some allies or some people who are states, countries that are neutral? The Western propaganda would make you think as though they're completely alone in the world and everyone is against them. In fact, if you took a Google search, you could scarcely find anything stating the contrary. I'll also discuss the strategic aims, if the West even has a strategy. Seems like their only strategy for the last half century has been protracted warfare, which is to say, to endlessly engage in war with no meaningful outcome. And well, I guess except bankrupting America and making it into a backwater. What can you do? Now, we're also going to talk about the response of the Russian state in terms of, if you, America, do this, then we, Russia, are going to do this, which is that piece of this lecture that involves you losing your life potentially due to the decisions of the American government. Yes, it's true. Russia does have capacity to attack us. Russia does have nuclear weapons. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say Putin is a savage. Shout out to Donovan. He writes, don't have anything to say. Thank you for your work, Marquett. Thank you very much for your support as a moderator. You are appreciated. Shout out to CB. He writes, peace to the saints. Just received my briefcase, backpack, super player. Oh, indeed it is. Yes, saints, we have some real knowledge for you today. May I also acknowledge those who have supported the work via PayPal as well and Cash App. First, let me shout out to Omid. He just got a hat at mdblabel.com. He got the classic one, the black with the red MDB label on it. May I also acknowledge Broderick, who writes, is America ready for war in the next 12 months? Well, here's a funny thing, Broderick. America is currently at war and probably has not been not at war for a long time. You see, the funny thing is that America utilizes the media, the fourth branch of government, to pull a wool over your eyes. We've been at war consistently, whether it was in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and the list goes on. We're in so many damn wars, we sometimes forget. Currently, we are in war in Syria. We just recently bombed Syria in the last 20 days. I actually spoke of this recently. So when you say, is America ready for war in the next 12 months? We're already at war. And that's the only thing we can state to our credit is that a country that, keeps their soldiers on the march and keeps their soldiers fighting, we should be well practiced in the art of war. But the strange reality is when you look at our record, as we pick on smaller countries that generally don't have nuclear capacity, what we usually do is we'll strip them down using the United Nations as an instrument. So while we instrumentalize the United Nations to take away their weapons to defend themselves, then we go and attack the country. This is a pattern. For example, in Iraq, we basically had UN inspectors go in, look for the nukes, and then Saddam said, okay, I'll give them up. Then once Saddam had gave up the nukes, then we went in there safely and took over the country after, aerial bombardment. Same thing with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. We had them denuclearize and give up certain capacity for weapons of mass destruction. Then once he was a lion without teeth, then we went in and vanquished him. It's a pattern. That's why we must admit that Iran and North Korea have been quite wise to maintain significant capacity in terms of their weapons programs, because the pattern is very clear that once you give up your weapons programs, America will renege on its word and then attack you. It's just pretty much what happens. Thank you for that question, Broderick. So I say that to say, yes, we are prepared for war in the sense that we've never stopped being at war in the last half century. But are we prepared for a war with Russia? Well, perhaps yes, in as much as Russia is being significantly weakened and that we're utilizing a strategy which is draining them not only of financial resources, but also of people, right? They have to send in their own troops. They're not using hired mercenaries from other countries. We often do this. So, yeah, I think we could handle Russia at this stage. And this is quite a curious thing. The only problem with America is being that we change administrations and we change presidents. And sometimes we have presidents who can't stay awake. We don't have a coherent overall strategy. One of the strengths of the Russian regime today is that they have one consistent leader over time so that they can build significant, long-term plans. You can, change a society in the long term, when you keep the same leader for, 15, 20 years, as we're seeing is occurring in certain states. Now, let's talk about this core piece. And of course, thank you to those who will send in their tuition as we go through this. And I'll certainly address your questions, opinions, and perspectives. Russia warns U.S. of sending long range weapons to Ukraine. Now, I find this whole thing to be quite reminiscent of the Cold War. We are still in a Cold War. A Cold War is when you don't have outright warfare between two nation states where they're shooting directly at one another, American soldier and Russian soldier shooting directly at each other. We're engaging in what's called proxy war. Proxy war is when a greater state, such as the United States, fights the Russians through the Ukrainians, right? We give them the aerial intelligence, the spare parts, the weapons, the money, so that they can keep up a fight on our behalf. We don't have to spill any American blood, though we certainly will bleed dry the American taxpayer. But at the end of the day, who cares about the American taxpayer? Because if you're in the American government, like say Nancy Pelosi, you're filthy rich, primarily off the backs of the American taxpayer. But that's neither here nor there. Carrying on. The reason that Russia has warned the U.S. of sending long-range weaponry, that is weaponry that can reach into Russia itself, is because they don't want to be attacked on their home soil, rightfully so. They don't want to have their infrastructure destroyed, which is generally what happens in war. They don't want to have the families, the Russian women and children being bombed. And this is going to destroy morale. That's going to sap the will of the Russian people to fight. That's the kind of thing that'll cause internal unrest in the Russian state. Those are the things that will get a leader unseated. And so, of course, they're trying to prevent that. And also, it's going to hit their economic base if Russia starts getting bombarded. This is, something, of course, intelligent bombardment would strike at Russia's heart, which is their economics, things like oil fields, natural gas pipelines, things that keep the war economy going. So Russia has basically warned the United States, if you are to provide long-range weaponry to Ukraine and we receive attacks on our soil, we will take that not as an attack from Ukraine, but a direct attack from the United States, and we will consider you to be a direct party to this war, which is to say we're then going to do something, quote, the likes of which you have never experienced in your nation's history. Major threat. What could it be? Who knows? If I were Putin, I would for sure consider that nuclear option, and I'd probably try to exercise it early and unexpectedly. The truth is, the best strategy is to attack the enemy when the enemy is unprepared. And for that reason, right now, if you're Putin, you'd be wise to hit the United States with the nuke if you could. Like, for example, if I was the leader of the United States, I would hit China with a nuke right now, out of the blue, completely unprovoked. You say, wow, Marquett, you sound like a complete psychopath. Well, no, if you're trying to maintain hegemony, which is world dominance, you'd hit the Chinese right now, because if you ever went to war with the Chinese, America would lose. China, around the end of World War II, had enough citizens to hold hands and wrap around the planet Earth 3 times. Just imagine how many citizens they have now compared to the US. So unless we're committing war crimes, we just can't beat them. Further, in terms of the ability to output military weaponry, they're just unparalleled. The only reason we were able to win World War II is because the United States was able to take a very dynamic capitalist economy and turn it into a wartime economy. All of those factories we had pumping out, Fords, we could convert them to pump out munitions and weapons and tanks and things like this. And us being a strong capitalist power, the powers that we were fighting, the USSR being a communist power, didn't have the same dynamism in their economy and the same productive capacity, which is why we're able to defeat the likes of the Germans, etc. So I say that to say this: if I were the United States, and me being a strong leader, looking at the future of my nation and wanting my nation to dominate, I would for sure, boom, nuclear hit on the Chinese. For sure, that would send the Russians on high alert, I surmise. I don't know what the Chinese capacity is to return fire, but I'd have to estimate that, and then I'd hit them right now while they're not ready. It's the only way to win. Then I'd carry on from there. You dig? But we don't have leaders that are that wise or ruthless. This is kind of talk you'd hear from a Henry Kissinger, who is truly a master of grand strategy. You don't have that kind of brains in the White House at this current time. You have the absence of brains, namely Joe Biden. In fact, he's a sleeper. Whether he has a brain or not, if you're asleep, I guess you just can't use your brain now, can you? Anyways, here we go. A senior Russian diplomat sternly warned Washington Friday, and this is an article written on September 2nd. Oh, you know what? Let's go farther back because this has been in the making for a while. So let's go back to the article written on May 31st, 2022. So we're going way back to May. Title is Biden agrees to provide Ukraine with longer range missiles, not long range missiles, longer range missiles. And I'm going to tell you what a very strategic leader would do in this situation. US President Joe Biden has agreed to provide Ukraine with advanced rocket systems that can strike with precision at long range Russian targets as a part of a $700 million weapons package expected to be unveiled Wednesday. Now, it is quite funny we're giving $700 million worth of anything to anyone other than the American citizens at a time when we're seeing the major spikes in gas prices, and that was not started by the Ukraine war, that was occurring before that. We're seeing major spikes in food costs and cost of living and all of the essentials that are going to adversely affect the quality of life of Americans, and particularly families and those who are lower income. So he's sending $700 million to Ukraine, which Ukraine will never be of benefit to America as a government or Americans as citizens. The United States is providing Ukraine with high mobility artillery rocket systems that can accurately hit targets as far as 50 miles away. Now, mind you, 50 miles is not terribly far. It's significant, but it's not terribly far. It's significant because you're accurate at 50 miles is pretty good, but that's not going to give them the range to get into Russia. After Ukraine gave assurances they will not use the missile to strike inside Russia. So here's the worst part of this deal. If you're a Ukrainian leader, I'd be disappointed because, number one, if I'm a Ukrainian leader and I get long range capacity and my long range capacity is limited to striking at targets within my territory, I just know that all of the targets that we actually hit are, destroying my infrastructure further. Yeah, it might kill a couple Russians. It's also going to destroy my infrastructure even more, might even cause some collateral damage, knowing that the Russians are taking territory which is occupied by Ukrainian citizens, be those Ukrainian citizens those who are truly sympathetic to my government or those who are sympathetic to the Russian government. But either way, I'm essentially shelling on my own land, which is less than ideal. Further, at best, I can drive the Russians from that given territory, but I would not, someone writes, attack China first. You lost all credibility there, dude. Thanks. We have a guy who has no photo, no real name, and doesn't know to put a period at the end of a sentence. What an imbecile. Further, you clearly don't realize that China is the biggest threat to America, full stop. I say this as a person who's traveled to China several times, went through in excess of 13 Chinese cities, done business with the Chinese government, and am very familiar with the history. You, sir, are a fucking idiot. Just side note. If you would like to come online and debate it, I'd be happy to do so. Just let me know. I'll drop the link. But one thing that wouldn't surprise me is that, persons like yourself who are anonymous, you just whisper things from the shadows of the internet. There are many of you. You are not a man, but I welcome you to give to pretend to be a man and come online. It almost never happens. Let's see how well I predict you. We'll give them a little bit of time, but until then, we'll carry on. Anyways, $700 million weapon system being sent over to Ukraine. The United States is providing Ukraine with high mobility artillery, and Ukraine gave assurances that they will not use these missiles to strike inside of Russia. Now, what I would do if I was Zelenskyy, I would say, yes, Biden, I will not strike inside of Russia. The second I get those weapons, I would strike inside of Russia. And the primary reason that you would strike inside of Russia is so that you can escalate things and cause the Russians to potentially make two missteps. Misstep number one is you're striking inside of Russia using American-funded weaponry or American-provided weaponry. Then Russia knows that if they want to prevent these kinds of attacks, they really need to address the real bad guy, which is to say the puppeteer, not the puppet. The puppet is Ukraine. The puppeteer is the United States. So me, Zelenskyy, I'd attack inside of Russia. That would then trigger the Russians to consider attacking the Americans, which might relieve a little bit of stress and heat on Ukraine as a target, number one. Number two, it would open up a two-front war, which would cause the United States and Russia to come into direct conflict. And when I've done this, it's not like America's going to abandon Ukraine all of a sudden. And certainly America's not going to attack Ukraine. So this can only work in my favor as Zalenskyy in Ukraine. So I would certainly attack Russia and attack their territory, because at the end of the day, there's no downside to it because Russia's already attacking me. There's only upside to it. Now, at that time, would Russia then escalate to war crimes? Probably not. I don't think they would. I couldn't see that happening. But even if they did, it's not like we're winning the war anyways. So certainly that would be my next move. I wouldn't even hesitate. The second those weapons touch down, I am going to align everyone to attack the nearest meaningful Russian target within their territory, ideally one that's rich in civilians. Because the key for the West, and Ukraine being a puppet of the West, is to unseat Vladimir Putin. And you surely cannot unseat Vladimir Putin unless there's significant internal discord. And we know that him having been former KGB and also having ruled that country with an iron fist for a significant amount of time, you need really determined opposition to Putin for you to unseat him, because there is no doubt that they will not end their special military operation within Ukraine without victory. It's too strategically important. Number one, it's on Russia's flank. You know, they're right next to us. We have to secure this because we don't want NATO having direct access to our border the whole way through. And there have already been 2 European nation states that are generally neutral who have applied for a NATO membership. So while we're dealing with Ukraine that doesn't have NATO membership, we must dominate, which is to say they're creating Ukraine as a buffer. Oh, by the way, did you guys notice that brave guy who doesn't have a name, you know, he did what they all do, which is to say he disappeared? Oh no, shocker. CJ Bailey writes, appreciate the quality as well as the consistent work, saying it's truly inspiring. Thank you. You know, I've resolved to outperform my enemies in all areas. And I said to myself, you know, like take this Hawaiian something fellow, Hawaiian silver fellow. I said, you know, me being twice the man, I ought to do twice the work just to prove it. So here I am, carrying on. In New York Times op-ed published Tuesday, Biden said Russia's invasion of Ukraine will end through diplomacy. This guy's an idiot. Can someone find Joe Biden and slap the living daylights out of him? First off, you know, this signals to Putin and the Eastern Europeans that you're not a worthy enemy. There is no worthy enemy who speaks of something ending in diplomacy. It might end in diplomacy, but surely not when you say so. You see, people seek the diplomatic solution with those that they cannot be on the military side, those who are determined. You see, they say, okay, we'll yield some things to you because we know that you're determined. Biden is not showing the face of one who is determined, talking about it'll end in diplomacy. Certainly not. Conversely, on the other side, you have Putin, who's saying things like, if you interfere, you'll experience something that your country has never experienced in their whole history, major threat. Putin said, we will not withdraw forces until we complete our special military operation, which for them is to secure the regions of Ukraine that are sympathetic to Russia. And this is basically a repeat of what they did in Crimea, which I believe was in 2014, the exact same playbook. And it didn't fail then. And I don't think it'll fail now under a Joe Biden, which is to say under a weaker America. Biden, in an op-ed piece, and mind you, anytime you hear the term op-ed, you should understand this to be that someone wrote a speech or wrote a statement or wrote an article on behalf of the United States president. And anytime you hear it's an op-ed piece in the New York Times, that just should indicate to you that the New York Times is an extension of the American government. There is not the separation of the media and state. So Biden said Russia's invasion of Ukraine will end through diplomacy. Funny. But the United States must provide significant weapons and ammunition to give Ukraine the highest leverage at the negotiation table. Now, just think about the double talk you're experiencing there. Well, we're talking about diplomacy while also talking about increasing war and enabling Ukraine, an inferior country by every measure, economically inferior, numerically inferior, that is population, and then inferior leadership, because Zalenskyy surely is no Putin, right? I mean, he came from the entertainment sphere. Putin came from the intelligence sphere. which is to say he was in the clandestine services KGB. This guy is trained at a very high level that Zalenskyy does not even have the smallest inkling of, like, who Putin really is, if he thinks he can match him. So I say that to say, you're not going to give Ukraine more leverage because Putin is not one you can negotiate with. And that's the major mistake of the United States historically in some of their pursuits, is that they think they can negotiate things that can't be negotiated. They think they can implant democracy in the Middle East. You cannot implant democracy in the Middle East. They think they can implant secularism in the Middle East. You cannot implant secularism in Islamic states. So they're learning the hard way and basically trying to be a neo-colonial power without exercising the brutality and force that former colonial masters exercised. America does not know how to do imperialism anymore. You dig? Not that I recommend it. Chris writes, quote, "Be the best at what you do. If you're in hell, be the biggest devil there." End quote. Yeah, and I don't recommend it, but hey, if that's where you end up, you heard me? Hey, go ahead and run it. Yes, sir. May I acknowledge Jamal comes in via Cash App with the support. Truly appreciate it. Carrying on. So here we are. Biden says that, quote, "That's why I've decided that we'll provide the Ukrainians with more advanced rocket systems and munitions that will enable them to more precisely strike key targets on the battlefield in Ukraine," end quote. The package also includes ammunition, counter-fire radars, a number of air surveillance radars, additional Javelin anti-tank missiles, as well as anti-armor weapons, giving them a lot of stuff. Ukraine officials have been asking allies for longer range missile systems that can fire a barrage of rockets hundreds of miles away. Hundreds of miles, in the hopes of turning the tide in the 3-month-long war. Well, the tide will not be turned. And the worst thing is that if you're a Ukrainian, you're just basically being used. You're a pawn in a war between America and the United States. And this is an age-old war. It started long ago with the former Soviet Union. And Gorbachev just recently died. And I don't think any real Russians actually cared about him passing, because the truth is, when the USSR disintegrated, which was largely a result of Gorbachev's weakness in leadership. I'm not saying they didn't have economic issues, but the truth is, when that nation or that empire fractured, a lot of satellite states like Uzbekistan became significantly weaker after and went into serious levels of poverty. Some of these former states have never recovered from that level of poverty. Russia has rebounded quite well, and I believe they'll continue to do well in the future. So Russia has little to worry about. Gorbachev, I do not think, will be significantly mourned in Russia. He was certainly more a friend to the West. And I think that the West, speaks well of him because he did them a great service, which was to dismantle their great enemy. Putin is no Gorbachev. Gorbachev liked to be diplomatic, and he realized he was in an ailing empire. Putin does not believe himself to be in an ailing empire. He is not there to be diplomatic. And in fact, when people don't yield to his requests, he just uses the iron fist. So I think we ought to understand who we're dealing with. Anyways, let's see. Biden on Tuesday told reporters, quote, "We are not going to send to Ukraine rocket systems that strike into Russia." Now, that's all nice talk. My hope is that the war ends today. Truth be told, I'm a man of peace. I hope that the war ends today and we can all resume the world as it was before this war, that we can end all wars. But the sad reality is the West, though it speaks of peace, has been the biggest driver of war around the world. And when I say the West, chief among those warmongers has been the United States. And it really doesn't matter whether it's a liberal leftist government or it's a government that purports to be on the right and purports to be conservative. None of these governments have been isolationist. They've all been interventionist. And that is why we see so many theaters of war perpetually going. Now, here's the sad thing. Though Biden is providing weaponry that can reach longer range, and Zelensky is agreeing not to strike Russia, we have no control over what Zelensky does. If we're talking about what is in the interest of Ukraine, the interest of Ukraine is to get help and to reduce the strain on their country and to open up an additional front against Russia so that the Russians have split their energies and to bring in a stronger power to fight Russia, because we all know that Ukraine's not strong enough to win. Even if they get the money, they don't have the population to win. So we saw this when Winston Churchill, in a similar situation, although the UK and the British Empire was much stronger position than Ukraine, which has never been a world power. Winston Churchill, when he was in World War II going against the German menace, he was appealing to the United States to come in and help. The United States was kind of doing the same thing and then eventually got involved. This could be the only hope of the Ukrainians, and a way that they can drive this is by striking Russia. He did not rule out providing any specific weapon systems, but instead appeared to be placing conditions on how they could be used. Biden wants to help Ukraine defend itself, but it has been opposed to providing weapons that Ukraine could use to attack Russia. Thousands of people have been killed in Ukraine and millions more displaced since the Russian invasion on February 24. Mind you, this has benefited a great many people. Ukraine has not had a strong economy. I'm not saying that it doesn't have some beautiful cities, some beautiful women, and a strong tech industry, but many of the Ukrainians who left as refugees wanted to leave before that because there was not plenty economic opportunities. Let that be known for the record. I was just touring Europe, and for example, when I was in Poland, there were a great many Ukrainians there who were becoming increasingly unwelcomed by the Polish population from the many folks I talked to. I know the Hungarians. I was in Hungary some time ago, a couple months ago, and they're pretty much like trying not to accept refugees. You dig? The Hungarians are a lot more nationalistic, shall we say. Their government is more on the right side, and for that reason, they're trying to keep their nation Hungarian. Thousands of people have been killed in Ukraine, and thousands doesn't sound like very much, to be honest with you. Millions displaced. Yeah, it happens. Moscow calls, from what Moscow calls a special military operation to denazify its neighbor. I think that's a fascinating terminology that the Russians are using. Not entirely clear on what it means, but after all, when the Western media suppresses information, we'll never get to know what the Russians really mean by this term, because you even had the likes of Facebook were suppressing information that was coming out on the Russian side. We've had the Google Corporation via YouTube suppressing information about the Russia-Ukraine conflict and categorizing certain videos under misinformation when you merely try to speak about it or give an opinion other than the dominant narrative, which is that Russia's a bad guy. Ukraine and its Western allies call this a baseless pretext for a war to seize territory. Now, mind you, when you're looking at empire building historically, grabbing territory is a critical task. It's like almost step one, for example. You see, when you look at the World War II efforts of the Nazis under Hitler, they had what was called Lebensraum, which is called living space, and they were trying to gobble up some territory. When you look at the USSR, the former Soviet Union, they included all these satellite states that were on their borders into their empire. They're gobbling up territory. Territory or land is critical as it provides you with more natural resources, which is most important. And secondarily, it provides you with more human resources, which is also helpful. So that is a major step in empire building. And undoubtedly, Putin would see himself in that long line of czars, new and improved, shall we say. The West has been increasingly willing to give Ukraine longer range weaponry, including M777 howitzers, as its force battles Russians with more success than intelligence officials have predicted. But U.S. now, mind you, there is not much success occurring in a war when you're fighting on your own land. Just point blank, period. You are not winning the war if you're fighting on your own land. Let that be known. Shout out to Jamal, comes in by Cash App. He writes, catch the replay, getting back to work, indeed. And thank you to those who support the work, whether you did the easy thing of clicking the like or you sent in your tuition via PayPal, Cash App, or Super Chat. It is appreciated. U.S. intelligence has also warned about growing risk, particularly given a mismatch between Russian President Vladimir Putin's apparent ambitions and the performance of his military. Well, truth be told, you know, I am disappointed in the Russian effort. I would have hoped they would have made quick work of these Ukrainians. But the United States is one to talk because last I checked, the Afghanistan engagement and the Iraq engagement kind of went on for a long time. And looks like we had to do the Iraq one on two different occasions, which means we didn't properly vanquish them the first time. So I don't know if America can really speak to that. Historically, in modern history, in my opinion, the only great war machine that was highly effective was that led by the Germans. And that's because they utilized blitzkrieg, which is basically an onslaught of everything we got to eradicate. And in my opinion, that's really the only function of war, is to eradicate until the other side capitulates. I'm not impressed with any of these actions I've seen. Anyways, Ukraine writes, Ukraine has started receiving harpooned anti-ship missiles from Denmark. Now, mind you, I hope Putin is putting Denmark on his hit list. I would. And self-propelled howitzers from the United States. Ukrainian Defense Minister Zalenskyy said on Saturday. Now, here's the thing you guys have to be mindful of. This is a very sensitive chess match that is occurring because if you're Putin, you know that Denmark is sending weapons to hurt you, yet you're not attacking Denmark directly. The truth is that, in my opinion, I think it's completely reasonable to attack Denmark. And if I were in office, I would utilize, I think they called it a mad dog strategy under Kissinger. I'd have to check back on that. But it's essentially the idea that as a head of state, you're liable to attack anyone who even coughs in your direction. And for that reason, you're able to better isolate the enemy. No one will support the enemy with finances or weapons because they know that you might just wild out and hit them with a bomb. You feel me? That being the case, it makes it easier and quicker to vanquish your enemy. And I think rightfully, Putin could attack Denmark because after all, if you're sending weapons to my enemy, are you two not my enemy? Clearly you are. So I would say Russia is playing very nice, and I can't blame Putin for playing so nice because at the end of the day, the leaders get to sacrifice the lives of the citizens, not themselves or not their families. I think we'd have war a lot less frequently if the leaders of these nation states had to also be a part of the war. Just imagine Joe Biden being a warrior king and having to go into war. I don't think he's going to make it. Give you all some time to support the work. Article 2, this is from September 2nd. Russia warns U.S. off sending long-range weapons to Ukraine. A senior Russian diplomat sternly warned Washington Friday against supplying long-range weapons to Ukraine, noting that the U.S. is balancing on the edge of direct involvement in the conflict. Oh, they're already involved. Let's be clear. They're already involved and they're directly involved. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov also pointed out that the country's military doctrine that envisages the use of nuclear weapons in case of a threat of the existence of the Russian state. Let me read that twice for you guys in case you missed that one. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, I think that's it, Ryabkov, also pointed to the country's military doctrine that envisages the use of nuclear weapons in case of a threat to the existence of the Russian state. Hey, I would have the same doctrine, but I'd probably invoke it early and often, you dig, in a real way. So he's basically saying, hey, let a shell or a mortar or any kind of strike land on the Russian territory. Well, God bless you. And, fair enough. So when you have a Russian deputy foreign minister basically saying that we are willing to use nuclear force if we're attacked, I tend to take all threats seriously, especially when you have a Russia responding to America, knowing that the only country in the history of humankind that's ever used nuclear capacity has been the United States. So if they are speaking of nuclear capacity to the United States, they got to be willing to press the button because they know America's pressed the button. Oh, and in case you were wondering, when America pressed the button on Japan, it wasn't really necessary. You dig? They did it, but it wasn't really necessary. So there you go. Shout out to Zachary Brown. He writes, sending tuition, getting back to work now. Appreciate you. Thank you, sir. And may your work be prosperous. Shout out to George. He writes, I am appreciative of these lectures. Peace to the saints. It is my pleasure. You are very welcome. And thank you to those who pay what they owe. Carrying on. Quote, we have repeatedly warned the U.S. about the consequences that may follow if the U.S. continues to flood Ukraine with weapons, Ryabkov said. Ryabkov said. Quote, it effectively puts itself in a state close to what can be described as a party to the conflict, end quote. And that's completely fair. That's completely fair. Just imagine you're in a fist fight, right? You're fighting one-on-one against somebody else. And there's a third guy standing behind that person you're fighting, handing them a knife, handing them brass knuckles, handing them a Uzi. Well, damn, I mean, you might kind of get angry at the guy standing behind the person you're supposed to be shooting a fair one with, right? You might get angry. So I would say, in reality, the Russians have been quite tolerant, more tolerant than I would have been, to be honest with you. Speaking on state television, Ryabkov warned that, can we get some diplomats with easier names to pronounce? Just come on, just please. Anyways, Ryabkov warned that, quote, a very narrow margin that separates the U.S. from becoming a party to the conflict mustn't create an illusion for rabid anti-Russian forces that everything will remain okay. My boy needs to improve his English game because this statement that he made is not very clear, and I can't hate that. I mean, Russian and English are radically different languages. I get that, and my Russian is terrible, aka non-existent. Shout out to Malik. He writes, I think Putin is talking the Azov or A30B in Russian. It's a militia, but they are alleged to be Nazi sympathizers / descendants. Check it out, Saint. Definitely worth the read. Okay, yeah, shoot me a link to something. I'd be willing to check it out. And I wouldn't be at all surprised. You know, there are some curious things that the Nazis said that I find to be quite fascinating. I was just in Germany, actually, just like 10 days ago, probably less, actually. And one thing that I found remarkable about Frankfurt is when I was in Frankfurt, I was looking around like, where are the Germans? I'm in Germany, but there's no Germans here. It's like, it's everyone else is here. You know, there's got Ethiopians, Nigerians, Arabs, Syrians, people from Eastern Europe. I was like, but where are the Germans at? It was remarkable. Pakistanis, like everyone except Germans were there. I thought that was quite curious and comical for a state that used to be a racial state, essentially. Shout out to Melvin, just got his drip game all the way up. He actually just copped something that I'm about to cop from mdblabel.com. He got the white hat with the MDB label. He also got the white bomber with the black stripe on the arm. I'm going to get the other one. I'm going to get the black one with the red stripe on the arm. He got the classic black hat with the red MDB label. Also the black shirt with the red MDB label. The drip is crazy. Yeah, he about to be clean. Shout out to Melvin. All right, carrying on. He emphasizes that Russia will push its offensive in Ukraine until it reaches its aims. And see, that's the whole point, guys. Russia is not, and shout out to Kid Blur coming through on Twitch. We are on Twitch at twitch.tv/Marquett Devon. Let me just make sure that is the right link for you all. I encourage you to join. Yep, that's the one, and it's working beautifully. Here we go. Twitch.com/Marquett Devon, log in. Now, he emphasized that Russia will push its offensive in Ukraine until it reaches its aims. And honestly, that's the only way to lead a war. That's the only way to lead a country, which is to never give in, never surrender, never retreat, never back down. That's the only way you get your respect in this war, in this world. And when you are dealing with aggressive nation states, ones like America, they only respect power. They don't respect diplomacy. The only time states use diplomacy is when they reach a stalemate and they say, you know what, you're just as powerful as we are. We're going to negotiate the rest because we'll be in endless war. or someone thinks they're going to lose and get obliterated, and then they want to come to the negotiation table. But anything short of that, you need to exercise power. Otto von Bismarck, statesman of Germany formerly, he said the great questions of our day will be settled by blood and iron, not by majority votes, which is to say, somebody got to go. Somebody going to get stabbed in the head out here before we can come to an agreement. We're going to reach peace, but it's going to be after war. And it's going to be settled by those who have won in war. Yeah. Shout out to the freak ass. Came through on Twitch. Shout out to the folks on Twitch. CJ writes, Russia is just sending empty threats, hoping Biden folds and allows Russia to expand their territory. Hey, well, is it an empty threat? Because I remember that Russia had, spoke up on Ukraine, and then they invaded Ukraine without anybody's permission against all international norms. I feel like low key, they're kind of doing what they said so far. Quote, Russia is capable of fully defending its interests, and the goals of the special military operation will be fully achieved. End quote. Ryabkov. Man, I wouldn't test them. I tell you what, there are certain people I would play with and certain people I wouldn't play with. I size up Joe Biden. I would play with Joe Biden, and I would do Kamala Harris dirty. You feel me? But when I look at Putin, he doesn't seem like the kind of guy I would play with. He seems like the kind of guy who has some tricks up his sleeve. He strikes me that way. He pointed out that Russia's military doctrine stipulates that it could use nuclear weapons in case of aggression against Russia and its allies involving mass destruction weapons, or an aggression involving conventional weapons that threaten the very existence of the Russian state. Supplies of the U.S. HIMARS, HIMARS, multiple rocket launchers, strengthen the striking capability of the Ukrainian army, which has used. This is a terrible article. This is written by apnews.com. And I am noticing consistently every time I go through trending news, we're reading these articles that are so poorly written. It's really a pity because these are written by professional writers. The truck-mounted system fires GPS-guided missiles capable of reaching targets up to 50 miles away. U.S. authorities so far have refrained from providing Ukraine with longer-range missiles for HIMARS launchers that can reach targets up to 186 miles and could potentially allow the Ukrainian military to hit areas deep inside of Russia. Quote, we are warning the U.S. against making provocative steps such as delivering long-range and more devastating weapons. Quote, it's a road to nowhere fraught with grave consequences, the responsibility for which will lie entirely with Washington. I tell you what, I love boss talk, and this is for sure boss talk. If I didn't live in America, I'd be curious to just see what happens, see who's bluffing and who's really with the shits. If I had to line up Putin and Biden, I'm going to go ahead and say Putin's going to win every day. That's just me, though. Now, you might ask yourself, what is the West doing in Ukraine anyways? What are their strategic goals? Are they trying to make Ukraine a part of NATO? Is that even possible? Well, let's see. The Brookings Institute wrote on this. The Ukraine war and the world's reaction to it will be a decisive factor in shaping global political economic order in decades ahead. Blah, blah, blah. While the outcome of the fighting remains uncertain, no, it doesn't. Russia's going to win. Blah, blah, blah. At the beginning of the war, the Western allies emphasized that defending the United Nations Charter and democracy were their primary objectives. No, that does not make any sense. The United States and NATO is a sham. Not NATO, but the United Nations is a sham, because if they care about democracy, can someone tell me if there's democracy in China? Can someone tell me, I think the guy's name is Xi Jinping, the current chairman of China, is he about to leave office anytime soon? Or is he like, they're going to be running things indefinitely? And has anyone said anything about China not being democratic? I'm going to go out on a limb and say they ain't said a damn thing. And that's because China has too much power. And while we're over here playing games against Russia, China's gobbling up everything in front of everyone's eyes, but people are scared to say anything because they're so powerful. Yeah, that's right. The real power is China. And America is scared The only American president in the last half century to really speak up on China was Donald Trump. Huh? Yeah. He's a wild boy. I agree. Now, all this, anytime you hear the term democracy mentioned, it's a scam. No one really cares about democracy. If America cared about democracy, they wouldn't have supported Saddam Hussein initially. Then they turned their back on him, changed their mind, but they do this all the time. If America cared about democracy, they wouldn't have supported the Shah of Iran, who is not democratic at all. If America cared about democracy, fill in the blank with 1,000 examples. If America cared about democracy, we wouldn't unseat democratically elected leaders. Hello. While any overall settlement of the Ukraine conflict must require Russia to bear some part of the reconstruction burden. Oh, here we go again. Now, this is where the big money plays come into factor. This is why I always tell you guys that you have to understand the news, because it will affect your pocketbook. If you are actually investing in the stock market, get ready to put some money into Caterpillar. Get ready to put some money into these organizations and businesses and companies that are going to be rebuilding infrastructure. We're talking about roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, critical things like that, things that provide medical supplies and all the rest of it. Because though in reality, America has no responsibility to rebuild Ukraine. We are not Eastern Europeans. We are not Slavic. We are not Russian speaking. We are not Ukrainian speaking. They've never done a damn thing for America in the history of America. We have no responsibility to them. But the leaders of American government who are in bed with big business will act like it's our responsibility. It's a moral necessity, so that they can then send in Caterpillar and all these big companies to rebuild Ukraine because it's the right thing to do. And then the government is going to award contracts to these big companies, and they're going to pay these big companies hundreds of millions to rebuild Ukraine. And here's the thing: Nancy Pelosi and her husband's a stock trader, owns a big firm. They're going to be the ones who get the early tips on which companies to invest in. And they're also going to give the contracts to those companies so that they can become richer through the whole process. It's amazing. It's amazing. And if you think American government is not corrupt, I mean, you are a real nut. You are a real nut. If you think America cares anything about Ukraine, you are a real nut. If you think that Russia is the biggest enemy of America, you are a real fool. You are uninformed, ignorant. The effect of such an alliance should not be underestimated. While China would be the bloc's center of gravity, Russia's relatively small GDP should not lead one to dismiss the country's scientific abilities, the size of its nuclear arsenal, its natural resource wealth, and the strategic importance of its vast territory. And the territory truly is vast. By pursuing measures that treat the Russian people differently than Putin and his autocracy, the world's democracies might hope to prevent long-term outcome in Russia, which, see, they're talking about basically in the aftermath of this situation, what do we do with Russia? Do we put sanctions on Russia? Do we punish Russia? The truth is that Russia holds too many cards in terms of natural gas and other critical resources and mineral wealth that they provide to Western Europe. And because of that reason, they are a necessary part of the world economy. So the Russian state will not be punished. And that's because Putin will not be extracted from that system. He is too deeply entrenched. And the only thing that could happen is for assassination to occur. And the truth is that an assassination attempt on Putin, if it does occur, it will undoubtedly occur by the organization of the United States clandestine services and some of the assets that they have there in that country. But it will not be a homegrown solution. I promise you that. Because anyone who would try to assassinate Vladimir Putin, who's a Russian citizen and who is within Russia, they should surely expect to die. And probably they don't have any family. They'd have to be an orphan, because they'd have to expect that their family members would be skinned alive as well, because that's how Russia operates. And we all know that. This article from the Brookings Institute is a load of trash. But I'll just give you a little bit of facts. Quote, rebuilding Ukraine will require hundreds of billions of dollars. That should drop your jaw. Hundreds of billions. 1 billion turns out to be a tremendous amount of money. Side note, they said hundreds of billions. Me personally, I wouldn't pick up the tab on that. That's just me, though. You dig? This effort thus risks diverting substantial aid from the global south. Let's just call a spade a spade. Blacks Hello, blacks. You thought we were about to help you with malaria, waterborne disease, all of the domestic unrest occurring in some of your countries, which is probably driven by America, anyways. You thought we were going to help you with the fact that you have the Chinese nation state, owning your ports and owning certain critical things like airports and rail stations. You thought we were going to help you with some of the things that are ailing sub-Saharan Africa. No, we're not. We're going to divert this money to Ukraine to fix a war that didn't even have to go on this long and be this damaging. Screw you, blackies. Screw you. We never cared about you anyways. Because if our whole effort was to save life, why is it we want to fight the Russians when it's so much easier to fight dirty water? Yeah, we could easily clean the water in the places in Africa where you can't get clean drinking water. And I say this having been to some of those places. Yeah, it'd be easy for us to clean the water. We have the technology, we have the capital. Obviously, we have the capital. We gave $700 million to Ukraine to commit murder, but we won't spend even a fraction of that to sustain life among the blacks. Bye bye, blacks. Yep. Yeah, that's what it is. And that's why I always let you all know that you must provide for self, whether you're black, blue, purple, or otherwise. Human beings are self-interested. Nation states are the same. Just turns out that the American nation state seems to be bipolar in its approach to geopolitics. Anyways, this effort thus risks diverting substantial aid from the global south, the blacks, which is still trying to get rich countries to fulfill their longstanding pledge to provide $100 billion per year to support, get this, climate change mitigation and adaptation in poor countries. Now, we all know that the third world cares damn near nothing about global climate change. I know that from having been there, okay? And I think the people who have created these policies know that as well. But what you have is the Western countries always try to force this global climate change narrative onto the poorer countries. They also try to force LGBTQ onto the third world countries, even though it's against their culture. Here's the funny thing. You want to stop global climate change. Why don't you get China to stop opening up all those damn coal factories and coal mines? China's running on coal. They're opening it up significant amounts every year. I remember when I was in college, I would hear of this, and it's still been going on. Oh, but you can't stop that. But somehow you're trying to tell a poor country to be in a green country when it's much cheaper to use coal rather than high-tech green energies like solar and wind. And we know solar and wind ain't getting the job done, because if solar and wind was getting the job done, Europe would not need Russia and Russian natural gas and Russian energy and Russian oil. If solar and natural gas was getting the job done, somebody's lying. We know who the somebody is. Yep. It will also be interesting to see the extent to which the procurement rules for reconstruction projects in Ukraine will allow non-donor developing countries to bid effectively. You see, when they're talking about bid, they're talking about the contracts for making money off of this. It's sad. If you want to understand the world, let me give you a little bit of Marquettism. If you want to understand the world, you need to understand it through the lens of money and sex. Money and sex. These are the two occupations of 99.9% of humankind. There are very few of us who are spiritually driven for good things. Most of humankind is driven on money and sex. For example, the LGBTQ, they call it a lifestyle. How's your sexual preference a lifestyle? That's not a lifestyle. That's just sex. But they try to glorify it so that they can get their way sexually. Freud wrote of these kind of things. And money, it's the other major driver of humankind. But here's the funny thing, that often the money is leveraged to get the sex. You see it. You see it on a small scale. You see it on a large scale. That is the way you understand the actions and thinking of the average person, unfortunately. I'll give you guys a little bit of time to support the work. I mean, who else can talk it like this? All right, let's see. Okay, looks like we need to wind this one down. Okay. So, in the event that Ukraine prevails, the West's treatment of Russia and its stance toward global South during Ukraine's reconstruction will determine whether the war's outcome serves as the launch pad for global progress. The Brookings Institute, by the way, Brookings Institute, you guys are trash, okay? And I also want you guys all to understand that the distance between the American left and the American right is very small. What you don't realize is that Americans are so brainwashed that they think a Democrat and a Republican are radically different positions. The sad reality is that in the past, it used to be that one group was more conservative and the other group was a lot less conservative, right? So you'd have one group that was pro-family, man and woman, you might say, man, woman, and child. But now they're both pro-LGBTQ. How is that? How can you have the Christian right is pro-LGBTQ? That doesn't make sense. They're damn near the same as the left. And so what you're finding is that these two different parties that purport to be radically different, they agree on all of the things that they probably shouldn't agree on. Both of them are interventionists, which is to say they believe America should stick our face in everybody's business around the world. And we should constantly start up new wars left and right, endless wars that drain our coffers and turn us into an impoverished state with tremendous debt. I'm speaking to the tune of trillions of dollars of debt. Both parties start up these wars. You saw Barack Obama, the Democrat hero, was starting wars. Then you saw George Bush, the Republican darling, was starting wars. They're doing the same thing, and they're actually quite much in bed together, and they're liars because Bush started the Iraq war. Obama got elected saying, I'm going to end the war in Iraq. Did he end it? Cut it. No, he didn't. Continued it. This is what I'm saying. They're both interventionists. They're both pro-LGBTQ, anti-family, anti-religion, and they both are basically being controlled by the Israeli lobby, which is what continues endless terrorism because we're giving them money to basically brutalize the Arabs in that region and maintain dominance. So how are they all seeming to be on the same page in terms of all those things? And they're all pro-illegal immigration because the Democrats and the Republicans, none of them have actually closed down the border. How is it that we can fly around the world and exercise effective military punishment upon, all these different countries, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, but somehow we can't protect our own border? That doesn't make any damn sense. So clearly we're all pro illegal immigration. Yeah, let's be real about that. Because if America, having literally the largest military in the world, literally the best funded military in the world, how is it we can't protect our own border? So that lets you know the government's not serious about it. There are a lot of things that we say as human beings, but we don't mean. We say it because it sounds nice, but we don't actually try to do anything about it. The border is one such thing. And further, it lets us know that we don't care about the American working poor. I don't either. But we don't care about the American working poor because if we did, we'd shut down those borders. Because let's be real here. When we get immigration into the country, is it doctors that are coming in, taking the jobs of doctors? No. Is it educated people coming in, taking my job as a CEO? No. It's low-skilled, unintelligent, or not unintelligent. I'm sure they're plenty intelligent. They're plenty industrious as well, but it's uneducated. It's low-skilled, uneducated labor that comes in and takes the jobs of the American poor. That's what it is. And they use our social systems, whether we're talking about healthcare, et cetera, and they basically just make it crowded and make the quality of service decline. And that's by design of the American government. Both the left and the right parties, they're both garbage. Yeah. Anyways, Brookings Institute is supposed to be a conservative think tank. What it really is a think tank, but I don't know if they're conservative or not conservative. Hell, I don't even know if they're thinking, because that article that I just read didn't have any meaningful information that seemed to come from research. It just had a bunch of conjecture and guessing, and then it had the wild figure of hundreds of billions of dollars to reconstruct Ukraine. How many hundreds of billions? Is it 200 billion or 900 billion? Because that's a major difference. Man, the quality of things in America has declined so precipitously, and that just lets us know that we are in a dark time. We are in need of leadership. And we are, in fact, in need of nationalism. You see, nationalism believes that means that the nation means something to you. It means something that we're all Americans. And as Americans, we need to help ourselves. We need to prioritize ourselves. We need to look out for each other. What kind of sense does it make that we're looking out for Ukrainians when American babies are struggling? Don't make any sense now, does it? Shout out to YKN Cope. He writes, I've been inconsistent with catching the lives, but consistent with consuming the content. I hear that. My name is Morton Copland Jr. I have my, oh, wow. He said, I had my biggest month in my e-commerce business. Had to swing through to show the big homie some love. Appreciate the knowledge and all you do. Peace of the saints. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to hear that. And as a capitalist and as one who trains men to be successful in e-commerce and product-based business, I'm very happy to hear that. May all of the saints congratulate him on his success, because we like to see people winning in a real way. Says we should be exporting oil, energy, food, not war. I feel you on that one, right? And here's the funny thing. How many wars has China started? None. None. In fact, they're exporting people. You can go pretty much anywhere on this world and find that there's a Chinatown there. And what the Chinese do is very strategic. I've traveled extensively in sub-Saharan Africa, and what you'll find if you go to Ethiopia and Addis Ababa, you'll find most of the new constructions, including things that are unnecessary, like big soccer stadiums, are all being financed and built by the Chinese government and corporations from China. And what they're doing is they'll have Amharic and they'll have Mandarin. And in some cases, they just got Mandarin, you feel me? Which is a clear indication that the Chinese are not only populating their persons there, but they're also taking over the local economy. And when the Chinese go places, like, for example, I saw them in Kenya, they don't even stay at the local Kenyan-owned hotels. They stay at their own hotels. So the Chinese go there, they send their own construction workers, which means that they're not increasing jobs for Kenyans. They build their own accommodations and hotels. They stay in Chinese-owned hotels, and there's a Chinatown where everything's in Mandarin. You damn near get lost while you're there. And so they're basically cycling all their money back to China. So the African nation states that are welcoming them with open arms are getting very little benefit. They're getting loans, which have high interest rates and draconian penalties. And when they fail to pay back the loan, China says, you know what the collateral was? Your airport or your port. So they take their port, which is their access to the sea for commercial goods. And now China owns the port in an African country or a country like Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or what have you. And now they're essentially milking the country just as a colonial power. And they did it without having to shed a single drop of African blood. I mean, in some cases, they do shed African blood. I think it was, I want to say in Zambia, if I recall correctly, there were some Chinese there who had killed some Zambian police. It gets like that. Yikes. Cold world out here, isn't it? Now, one thing I wanted to talk about before we wind down, actually two things, if you don't mind. And thank you to those who support the work. It really does mean a lot. Shout out to Austin, who comes and he writes, thank you for the news. Truly a pleasure. One thing I want to mention is the allies of Russia, because it appears that they're never spoken of. You damn near got to search through 1,000 results on Google to figure out who is Russia's ally. And it's funny because I'm looking at this article, and this article is a bit dishonest because it's listing one country that I know for a fact is not an ally of Russia. And it's also failing to list another country that I know for a fact is an ally of Russia. So the news is very suspicious, shall I say. This is from metro.co.uk. It's a major news outlet, and you can see the logo of this news outlet is in rainbow fonts. So that gives you an indication of their leanings. Has Russia got any allies is their question. And this really shouldn't be a question. This is something that we should all be familiar with, as the major news for the last, 6 months or so has been about this war. Not 6 months, maybe 3 months. Armenia has been a long-term ally of Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and these are all states that are relatively small and ineffective. Uzbekistan, it looks like they got a lot of the stands. And Cuba, that's a historical thing. India, now that's a good partner. Pakistan has had a decent back and forth relationship with Russia. But one thing to be aware of is that Pakistan, being a largely religious nation, they had a lot of issues in the past with Russia because Russia is an atheist nation when it was communist. Also, it states that Israel is an ally, and that's just frankly not true, especially in this current conflict. If you didn't know, Zalenskyy is of Jewish descent. And so Israel certainly is not about to support Russia against a Ukraine headed by a Jew. I mean, that wouldn't make any sense now, would it? We know that they stick together, and that's to the merit of the Jews, and may the saints stick together with the same seriousness. It says that Turkey is an ally of Russia. Now it says, is China considered a strong ally of Russia? Well, historically, we would certainly have to say yes, that is the case. And history is a fascinating thing. You might not be aware, but the Russians were the first to adopt communism under Vladimir Ilyich Plekhanov Lenin. And they developed quite a remarkable state. And under Joseph Stalin, they rapidly industrialized. And one of the things that this foundational communist state did was they exported their ideology. One of the major landing places of this ideology was in China. In China at the time, there was a war between the nationalists and the communists, which was Mao Zedong versus, can't even remember the gentleman's name, but essentially he retreated to Thailand, or excuse me, not Thailand, Taiwan eventually. And so China became dominated by Mao, who was a communist. And all of the development of China, that foundation was created by the Russians. They sent educators, engineers, scientists, architects, military strategists, all to build up China. Eventually, China would outpace Russia because Russia was in direct conflict with America and they lost. Whereas China had some economic reforms occurring in the 1980s, I believe, if I recall correctly. And I want to say those were under Deng Xiaoping. And those economic reforms turned China from a communist economy, that is essentially planned economy, to a capitalist economy. So although they still call themselves communists, maybe socially speaking, their economy is very much so capitalist. And we know it because everything we have here says made in China, and it's made by, business in China. Certainly the Communist Party still is controlling there, and it's still very repressive state, but they have a capitalist economy, no doubt. And in fact, I'd even venture to say that they're outperforming America in capitalism. And that's why we get so much produced there, because they don't have the same protections for workers that we have. That's why they can pay their workers so little. That's why it's so inexpensive to have your factories and your production in China. And I know personally, because I have production in China for a great many products. I also have production throughout other places in Europe and America. Latvia is a great place where you get high quality products, high quality leathers. I have production in Italy as well, and many other places. Anyways, I say that to say China and Russia have historically been very strong partners for obvious reasons. In fact, historically, they fought against America together. You see, as Russian, as communist allies, and to this very day, they're close friends. Now, there's a section of this article that asks, have any Russian allies condemned the war in Ukraine? Now, frankly, it doesn't really matter what anyone says. A war is not a war of words, but rather a war of weaponry, a war of bullets, a war of missiles, not a war of words. Words are largely irrelevant unless you're talking about the words that inspired the masses to uprise and dethrone leaders. Now, those words matter. But condemning the Russian war, India's Prime Minister Modi called for an immediate cessation of violence. Well, when you call for something you don't have the power to call for, you're just wasting your words. And a cessation of violence doesn't really condemn either side. China said it will not provide Moscow with military support, but it has been upping trade with Russia. So it's supported Russia economically, which is just as good because Russia can buy weaponry from a number of pariah states like North Korea or Iran and others. So that's not an issue. Israel has expressed concern about actions taken by Putin. As I said, of course, those actions are against a Jewish head of state in Ukraine. Turkey's taken a neutral stance, which is quite remarkable because Turkey is very much so, trying to be more European, trying to be in the European Union and stay on that vibe. So they're playing quite a strategic game there. Essentially, most have not said anything. Belarus being basically Russia's little buddy. Of course, they're siding with the Russians, and that's in their strategic interest. If I was Belarus, I would side with the Russians too. They really have to, low key. Myanmar has gone on record as calling the invasion of Ukraine justified. Now, that's gangster. Now, Myanmar has been a pariah state as well, and the name of it has changed. There's a lot that's been going on, but they are pro-Russian. Venezuela has not openly supported the invasion of Ukraine, but they've condemned the U.S. for aiding in the breaking of the Minsk agreement. And you might say, well, what's the Minsk agreement? It's worth you looking into. It is basically something that I won't get into it. I spoke about it in previous lives. The Minsk agreements were a series of international agreements which sought to end the war in Donbass region of Ukraine. Syria has also supported Putin's actions, and this is important. Pay attention to this. Now, mind you, recently America just bombed Syria, just heads up. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Now, I'm shocked he's still alive, to be honest with you. I could have sworn America would have taken him out by now. I know they're trying. Bashar al-Assad had a phone call with Putin during which Al Jazeera reported that he praised Russia's military incursion into Ukraine, denouncing what he called the Western hysteria surrounding it. Al-Assad told Putin what was happening in Ukraine was a correction of history and restoration of balance, which was lost in the world after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Woo-wee, he talking big talk. He's a real bedfellow with Putin, and I can't blame him, because the truth is America tried to unseat Bashar al-Assad. He basically tried to take this guy out of power in his own country, and Assad fought back against all odds, and the Russians have aided them. And that was strategic on the part of the Russians, geopolitically speaking. And of course, Bashar al-Assad is going to be an ally of Putin from now to the day he dies. And Putin was wise to set that up. Shout out to Matthew. I got a consultation with him coming up on Saturday. Look forward to that. If you would like to get your consultation going, you can book at cozycow.com/SASN. Shout out to those men and women who are improving their own economic opportunities by learning how to do product-based business. We've sent out, we probably creeping up on $100,000 we've sent out to folks. Just recently, we had one of the saints who released a new product. Steve, he released the duffel bag backpack for travel or for the gym. Sent him out. How much did we send out, Steve? Yeah, $1,200 check to Steve. And that was his first time ever doing a product. $1,200 first payday. And he has more money on the way. So, there's some who talk it. There are others who walk it. I send out money to folks like you who watch me. That's why when you support me, the money goes right back to you. You dig? You're not just supporting me. You're supporting the Saint and the Sinner Nation. You're supporting this entire infrastructure that I'm creating. The real ones understand. Saints, I want to give you a last piece on Russia. Oh, may I also acknowledge folks supporting the work? Oh, no, that was not someone supporting the work. Yeah, I told him how Melvin got that one. Yeah, that's your favorite one. You like the white jacket with the black armband. Oh, okay, that's funny. I'm getting the black one with the red armband. mdblabel.com. Yeah, it's classic. It's a classic. Shout out to Joshua, comes in with tuition, supporting the work. Thank you very much. Oh, hey, there we go. We got Nick. He writes, peace to the Saints, tuition for all this great content and truth you've been putting out. Thank you for going hard. I appreciate you, Quett. Absolutely appreciate you too, Saint. Yes, indeed. He writes, do you think any of Andrew Tate's fights look fixed? I couldn't call it. I haven't watched enough of them. I tell you, there's no amount of money that could have me get knocked out. But, then again, I have other sources of income. But if you don't, I suppose, hey, you do what you got to do. Certainly the fight sport does have people taking falls. There's just no doubt about that. My last piece of news for you. This one is by Newsweek.com. Putin allies turn Ukraine war into fight against U.S. LGBTQ plus values. Thank God. Let's see. Have some water. They got a video that they're showing on their website. It's pretty funny because they say 100 gay activists gathered together, which 100 activists is not very much. Like, for example, when we have a conference, we have way more people than that. So 100 ain't nothing. I don't even know why they would report on that, except that they're trying to promote LGBTQ in Russia, because 100 people gathering is not news. Let us be clear on that. If 100 people gathering is news, then that would mean that my conference, the 4 conferences I've put on, have been news then. Various Russian figures and allies of President Putin have recently used the Ukraine war as an excuse to target the LGBTQ plus community. They're taking opportunities. Among them is Ramzan Kadyrov, the leader of the Chechen Republic and longtime supporter of Putin. In a message on his Telegram channel, the hell is that? He took an aim at transgender people, saying that he does not want his, quote, children and the children of their children to grow up in an atmosphere of satanic ideas of gender disgrace and for the sake of the economies of other states. I feel you on that one, bro. Well-known Russian One host Olga Shakabyeva. Oh, so this is a female. I love to hear the ladies speak up. You dig? Shout out to the lady saints. You hear me? Rakely writes, on that note, allegedly, Ukraine is a massive trafficking region. Piece of sense, bruh, in a real way. Number one, them Ukrainian chicks be bad. They ain't got no morals and no decency, and they mostly gold diggers, but they be bad. A lot of Eastern European chicks end up being trafficked, some against their will and others voluntarily. Just is what it is. And shout out to Rakely for always supporting. I believe he came in earlier today on the stream. Olga says that she's had what Newsweek is calling hateful rhetoric toward the LGBTQ plus people on at least two recent occasions, according to tweets from BBC reporter Francis Scar. Well, that's a terrible last name. On Tuesday, Scar shared a video of Shakabyeva saying Russia will also have to denazify the trans fascists. Nice. In addition to Ukraine. Scar posted another clip on Thursday of Skabyeva saying Russia can ultimately win out over Western powers by waiting for the West to run out of people due to the lack of human reproduction and connection with the LGBTQ. Let me say that one more time because I was cold-blooded and funny. Basically, Shorty said that Russia can just wait for all of us to turn homo in the West. Being that we don't have kids, our population will die out and they'll win. That's pretty funny. That's clever. I like that. Last month, the Center for European Policy Analysis wrote that while LGBTQ plus rights were bad in Russia before the Ukraine war, the situation has only gotten worse since Putin ordered his troops to invade the country in February. You know what? It would be even more clever if he sent all of the LGBTQ into the war as soldiers on the front line. That would really be clever if he's really trying to make some progress. I'm just saying, side note. Anyways, let's see. The think tank wrote that after the war began, homophobic propaganda has been expanded from one of the supporting pillars of Russian quasi-ideology to include justification for its war and aggression. That doesn't make any damn sense. What does the war in Ukraine have to do with homosexuality? That makes no sense. Okay, I think I'm done with this article. It basically seems like a propaganda piece. It doesn't seem reasonable. Shout out to Hector. He writes, you are on overdrive today. Peace of the saints. I appreciate that. I appreciate you acknowledging the work ethic. I'm trying to go hard out here and see what it does. I truly believe that we have a very important message and that the world is in disrepair morally. And it is upon us not to complain, not to describe the situation, but to take action. And so we shall. Saints, it's been a pleasure to have this time to fellowship with you. Let us end this the way we always end this, with the creed of the SASN. Repeat after me with full conviction, knowing this is true of you. The creed of the SASN. I am going to be who I truly am because I am remarkable. And I'm going to strive every moment to show the greatest part of who I am. Until next time, peace to the saints.